Hello, everyone. My name is Lexi. I'm your host, and this is Lexi's Book Nook. This is a podcast and a booktube all in one, but you're listening here on YouTube where I will talk about all things books, book club recommendations, and Reese Witherspoon book club picks, and then things on my TBR list. So you probably have noticed that Babel, which is today's episode, is neither of those things except my TBR list. So I will be talking about that based on that. If you listen to my podcast, then you know that this is a bonus episode. My podcast, Lexi's Book Nook, is available on Spotify for free. I have 2 episodes per month. The first episode is the beginning of the month, where I will kind of briefly go over all the books I'll be reading for the month. There will be 2 book club recommendations that I'm a part of, 2 separate book clubs, one back in my hometown, Bel Air, Maryland, and the one where I currently live in Cockeysville, Maryland. I'll have a Reese Witherspoon pick and then books on my TBR list. So by the end of the month, that second episode will be by the time I finish reading all of those books. Then I'll give a summary of each of them, my thoughts, and then a few discussion questions, kind of like a little book club in a podcast. So like I mentioned, today's a bonus episode, so this is not going to be on Spotify, but it will be on Patreon. So if you want to support my podcast, Patreon is a great way to do that, and you'll be able to see my face, you'll be able to see my little book nook, the covers of the books, and then get inspiration for your own book nook for only $3 per month, and you can support my podcast. But you're here on BookTube, so we are going to go over my book, Babel. And before we get into that, I am going to show you a copy of the cover. So I listened to this, so this is why that it's on my phone. And it looks like an arcane 19th century England tower. And this is the University of Babel, pretty much. I'm going to call it the University of Babel. It's really called like the University of Translation, but I'm just going to say Babel. But we're going to go right into it. So like I mentioned, I'm going to go over a brief summary, my thoughts on the book, and then just a few discussion questions. I'm only going to do 3 episodes to keep it nice and short, and then you can move on with your day. So, Babel takes place in England, 1828. Robin, orphaned by cholera in Canton, is brought to London by Professor Lovell. In London, he is trained for years in Latin, ancient Greek, and Chinese. All of this in preparation for the day he will enroll in Oxford University's prestigious Royal Institute of Translation, otherwise known as Babel. There's the right name for the university. Anyway, the tower and its students are the world's center for translation and magic in the form of silverworking. These silver bars have made England unparalleled in power, as the arcane craft serves the empire's quest for colonization. So this might sound a little dry to others, but it's actually a little bit more exciting. So these silver bars are magical based on the translation of words. So they had to have a related translation from one language on one side of the bar and then another language of the same meaning, not necessarily the same word, on the other side of the bar. And then once they're paired, that silver becomes magical. But with great magic and great power comes great responsibility. And that power is kind of where all this political strife comes into play. So it does get a little dry. So kind of going into my thoughts, it kind of got dry in that aspect, but the magic making and the silver working was the very interesting part. So I thought the book was really cool for the first half to 2/3 of the book because of that, because we're seeing Robin go through school and how excited he was, how magical and how great his school was, how his friends are, and his friends are all very likable. It was kind of like Harry Potter in a sense. Not quite as magical, but very exciting like Harry Potter. But they kind of like skipped through his school years very, very quickly. And I wanted more of the school years because it was really fun. And then I also mentioned that I like the magic behind the translation and the use of the silver bars. And I mentioned that these silver bars are really the political center of this book. It's also the center of the world's economy, and that's where it got dry. But overall, I loved most of the book. I'm not huge on the very political books, so that's why I probably wouldn't rate this very high. I gave it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. but I liked it. I thought it was engaging for most of the part, and I liked most of the characters. So I'm going to just do 3 discussion questions. The book covers a lot of academic topics like etymology and power dynamics and international trade. But there was also the world building with silver magic and some major action sequences. Of those 3 academic topics, magic and action, which would you have wanted more of and which would you have wanted less of? So, being the fantasy girl that I am, I would have wanted more magic. I wanted more of what these silver bars could do, not just for like the economy and politics, but like in general, like how magical are they? Like what kind of actions can they do for us? So I wanted more of that. But I think the topic I really liked less was the action, and that action was like in the end of the book, like that last third of it, like I mentioned, where it got kind of dry. All the actions towards like how the silver bars played a role in the world. Like I didn't really care for that, so like, I would have wanted more magic first, academic topics, and then action. Professor Lovell says to Robin, laziness and deceit are common traits among your kind. This is why China remains an indolent and backwards country while her neighbors hustle towards progress. You must resist these traits, Robin. You must learn to overcome the pollution of your blood. ... And yet Robin was also Lovell's blood son and half British. What explains Lovell's cognitive dissonance on this topic? So this is going to kind of, I'm going to say my response, but this comment that Professor Lovell says to Robin is kind of racist, even though Professor Lovell is Asian as well. So I think he distanced himself from his heritage. He's become arrogant and complacent, and I think it's because he doesn't see himself to have those traits, such as laziness and deceitfulness. So he's probably purposely removing himself from it because he doesn't want to be associated with those kind of traits, and he's kind of like giving a warning to Robin. Or, and I'm just seeing like the best out of people, maybe Professor Lovell does see these traits in himself, and he's trying to have Robin learn from mistakes so that Robin doesn't become like him. But in all honesty, I think it's because Professor Lovell is complacent and he is removing himself from his Chinese heritage. So that went on a racist note, and I didn't want to make it sound like that, but I think that's a very good discussion question, and maybe that race can be tied into a better conversation with certain individuals. So if you are sensitive to this, maybe don't ask that. But this might be good for a book club. But the last question is to consider Robin's story arc. Was it a matter of maturation and then radicalization, or was he simply a frog slowly boiling in the water who couldn't back down once it bubbled over? And this is over Robin's realization of how the bars are being misused and how his eyes have opened to different perspectives once he joined this organization called the Hermes Group, and his blood brother was a part of it. So I think because of that, of the Hermes Group, he has been exposed to more politics about it and the misuse and abuse of how these bars affect certain individuals and the lives of many others. And I think really he was more radical than mature. He has, in a sense, become more mature, but I think he was looking for something to act on or act upon. And he became a rioter near the end. He even says, this is how colonization works. It convinces us that the fallout from resistance is entirely our fault, that the immoral choice is resistance itself rather than the circumstances that demanded it. He was ready to stand up about the immorality of the use of silver. So maybe it's a little bit of all of them, because as I was typing this, it also sounded like he was a frog boiling in the water, waiting for like action to come up. So I think it's a little bit of all of them, but I think it's mostly because he's become more radical. But those are just my thoughts on it. Maybe you have different thoughts on how his perspective added up near the end, and you can always contact me. You can add more questions for me to answer. I have a website called lexisbooknook.com That is spelled LEXIES, booknook.com. And my contact information is on there, so you can always email me with any questions you have for me, or you want to add additional discussion questions, or if you want to give me book recommendations. I am open to any and all suggestions. But that is all for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed Babel. If you haven't read it yet, read it. You can buy it on my bookshop. Yes, on my website, lexisbooknook.com. Buy your own copy. I will make a small commission based off of your sale at no extra cost to you. So buy your copy, read it, let me know what you think. Contact me if you have any questions, or tell me if you liked it or you hated it. Let me know. I'd love to know. But I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you keep on reading.